Our speaker today is Doug Devine. Doug served United States Marine Corps. He was a captain, flew helicopters. He was in from 62 to 66, flew in Vietnam. I found this interesting under campaigns. He just said, well, there's just like a bunch of them. So we're going to let him tell us about that. I would assume pretty significant, because if he earned 22 air medals, he was doing some significant flying in some difficult locations. And so he's going to be sharing his experiences with us today. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Doug Devine.
Thank you, Wayne. Let's see if this does work. Yes, that's me. I've introduced myself a time too at these meetings. This group really inspires me, gentlemen and ladies. This is so much of giving back to these kids in school. I just so enjoy speaking to these kids and letting them know what it is that we do and why we do it. That's me. I flew helicopters. It was pretty exciting. We'll get to that. This is what we're going to do today. A little closer, a little closer. I'll talk just a little bit about me. Then I'll talk a little bit about you. And then we'll get into some of the Marine Corps happenings. An episode in training in Quantico. My very first flight in Vietnam. Cave attack. One of the missions. Will show you a little bit about what we were doing out there. And then what I like to call the ultimate flying maneuver. And we'll get into that more thoroughly. This was me, November 93. I'm sorry, 63, a long time ago. And I earned my wings in Pensacola. Just a very exciting time of life. Perhaps the most exciting was carrier qualifications. I happened to find this painting, and the painting is of the Lexington. The Lexington is the ship that we used, and it's a World War II fighter aircraft, much like the big T-28 that we flew in training. The aircraft that I flew was a Huey. I was going to build one for you so you could see it, but I'm telling you, these kits are well beyond me. Maybe one of my grandkids will pick it up and finish it for me. Of my recall, this has been in my office for 30 some odd years, and every time I look at it, it means something to me. The men that we served with, the ones that were lost, those that came home, this picture says it better than anything else that I know of. After the Marine Corps, I was able to get a job with Lockheed. We were working on the rigid-rotor, brand new type concept in helicopter flying, and it was the Cheyenne program, the AH-56. One of the things that I would do for Lockheed was to demonstrate the smaller rigid rotor, which flew very nicely, but it had the same big problem that ended the program in 1969, 1970. But I get to fly General Westmoreland, Curtis LeMay, Senator Kennedy, a variety of military people that came to inspect what we were able to do with the rigid rotor. Okay, on to the next. This is the U part. The U part goes like this. Dr. Linus Pauling, he was known for vitamin C, and he pushed vitamin C, and it was really significant because vitamin C had been kind of ignored up to that time. Well, Linus Pauling was turning 90 years old, and there was a party for him, and everybody was gathered around, and someone asked the question, Dr. Pauling, what's the secret to longevity? And of course, everybody expected, oh, it's got to be vitamin. But no, 3 words. And these 3 words are so significant, and I use handrails. Use the handrails. It's so significant. You know, we think we don't need it. We got balance. We can walk the stairs. No. Once those bones start breaking, it can be really, really rugged. The second thing I want to share with you are the vowels. The vowels. Everybody knows the vowels. You can realize that your face has far more muscles than any other part. Face needs to be exercised, and let's all try it together. Now, this takes a lot more energy than you normally would say when you say A, E, I, O, U. What we're going to do is go through each one and hit it really good. And I'll don't oh, there, we're getting it. We're getting it. I see some motion out there. Ew. Okay, now we know what we can do, but there's a time and a place for the vowels. The shower's a good time. When you're by yourself, driving along the freeway, no one's looking, give it A, E, I, O, U. And if all that fails, there's one thing the face really responds to. It's the smile. It's the smile. Have that smile ready to go. Always good. Sounds good. Okay, this one's a little bit blank. And it Quantico, Virginia. I went in the PLC program when I was, 18. And sure enough, early on in the training, platoon sergeant is looking around the platoon and he says, okay, I want a singer. No, sir. No one's going to put their hand in the air. A singer? That doesn't sound good. He says, we're going to be a singing platoon, and I want a song leader. And he says, I'm going to go into all your resumes and see who was in a choir in high school. Okay, me. Okay, Devine, you're the song leader. Oh boy. He gave me 4 printed songs, and I was supposed to teach the rest of the group the songs. There were a lot of new adjectives that came popping up with Devine. There was a uck Devine. There was a ol Devine. There was a it Devine. They never rhymed, but those were adjectives that were accompanying my name in the squad bay. And as hard as I tried to teach these kids, I'm happy when I'm hiking, pack up on my back. A lot of signs, a lot of adjectives for Devine. It wasn't working. What do you know? The next day, we were having to run for a recorded time, a quarter of a mile, and one of the kids in our platoon was going to University of Kansas, was training under that incredible coach. I don't recall his name, but this kid was a miler, and he was built like a runner. We all get out there to run, and I make sure that I'm in his heat, because we're doing about 4 or 5 different heats. And I'm running with him, and I'm sticking right on his shoulder. He's not getting away from me until the last 30, 40 yards, and his training just took over, and boom, he finished real nice. A beautiful time. We were running in boots and our uniforms and all that. It was strenuous. But the fact that I put out so much energy and was able to stay with this kid made a big impact on him. And he, having had prior service, was the go-to leader in the group. That night in the Quonset hut, he says, okay, guys, we're getting behind Devine. We're going to help him out. We're going to learn these songs. What do you know? We would march along, and of course, I was marching backwards. We're happy when we're hiking, sure enough, everybody's singing along and we sound pretty good. But the part that everybody liked the most was, yep, okay, there we go. That's training. Now we're going to jump into Vietnam. We came over on the Princeton, the whole air group, MAG 36. We loaded up in Long Beach. We had, what, 5, 6 squadrons, backup squadrons, all sorts of personnel. And we land in Da Nang. There's no Marble Mountain. Marble Mountain is underway. It's almost there, but we're not ready to move in quite yet. And I'm standing around trying to find out. The heat is overwhelming, a little bit like today. Very warm, very warm. And it turns out that I was in the ready room tent. I was just learning which tents were which. And it was a call on the phone, and a buddy of mine who I'd played basketball with, he'd been there 4 or 5 months, and so he was quite a bit more attuned to what was going on. Emergency medevac was out just 8 clicks south of Da Nang, and it was time for a gunship to get out there. He says, "Doug, let's go. Be my co-pilot." So out we go. And as a gunship, typically you're up about 1,200 feet, and you come down and you zoom in on the target. You got to fly into the target. You have a little World War II sight that you pull down in front of you. It's a little circle with a cross in it. And you home in and you go where the fire is. Well, we hear the fellow on the ground, and both Norm and I recognize his voice. It's our buddy Danny Armstrong. He's down there and he's taking fire. And so Norm says, "Here we go, Doug. Here we go." And I'm telling you, this is exactly what it looked like. We got the aircraft up and ready to go. Flying down there. This represents the tracers that were coming up. And it was literally flying into an ice cream cone. And as soon as we start firing, the fire from the ground stops. The aircraft, the medevac, is able to pull out of the zone, get out safely. Boom, that's all it needed. But on the way back, I said, "Norm, what do you think our life expectancy is here?" I mean, he'd been there 4 or 5 months. I didn't think it looked too good. But he said something that resonated over time. Didn't resonate right away. He said, "Doug, you're going to lust for moments like this." That is, knowing that the enemy is out there, they have you in their sights, and you're going to put them in their sights, and you go get them. That worked out, fortunately. Whoops, I lost my... There we go. Okay, we had been in Da Nang, right about there. Towards the end of my tour, we were spending a lot of time up by the DMZ. And the DMZ was particularly significant, as John Baker can tell you. All of the recon types, we're dropping them into the DMZ. 70% of the time, we're pulling them out under fire. They'd been found and were being surrounded, and we'd have to pull them out. This was 65. Yeah, I got into Da Nang at last day of August. My first flight was September 65. So this was towards spring in 66 that we were up in the DMZ. Thank you. What happened up there? Well, let's go this way. It seemed pretty important to be able to get into zones that were under fire. And something happened in December 9th, 1965. Our operations officer named Don Riley, Don had kind of picked me up as the new guy and slapped me into his co-pilot seat. And I was learning a tremendous amount from Don Riley. And this one particular day, I was going to be up and flying with Don, and he decided to leave early. He grabbed another fellow, put him in his co-pilot seat, and off they went. At the end of the day, the Don Riley, although he was in a gunship, got called in, pick up a medevac. He flew like you normally would, coming in, leveling, took one right below the throat, crash landed, and subsequently died that evening. I was flying medevac by then and thought, man, it's got to be a better way. Now, the H-34s like to be at high altitude and cut the engine and circle down in an auto rotation and be able to land in the zone. And that seemed to work. However, I thought there was a better way. And that better way was going to be coming in at treetop level at top speed. Here's my helicopter. There's my rotors. These are my rotors up here. And I'm coming in top speed, and I cut the engine and flip the aircraft up on its side, and I use that big rotor system as a rotor brake. I tried it a number of times at 2,000 feet, and I needed 2,000 feet a couple of times because it's a little tricky. The airflow is changing through the rotors. Your RPM is maintaining itself only because you're at speed. You're trading speed for altitude and RPM. And as you approach the zone itself, it's time to flip it up on its side and set it right down in the zone. Well, that seemed to work pretty well. You got to say it again. Well, practice. I happen to be a test pilot in the squadron, and therefore, after testing an aircraft, I was up to 2,000 feet and started working on this maneuver at height. And I'd say a couple of dozen times before. The aircraft, interestingly, will tell you what's going on if you can listen to it. You got the dials, you can't look at the dials, you're too busy. You're flying at treetop level, you're coming in, you spot the zone, up it goes on the side and down into the zone. I used that maneuver, I would say maybe less than 100 times, but I used it, and I used it effectively, because going into hot zones, I never took one hit. And the reason, of course, is they're not able, the enemy is not able to see you in their sights. The treetops are there. It worked pretty well. This is it diagrammed. Cutting the engine, coming along the treetops, seeing the zone, going into a sideward flare, using that rotor system for an air brake. And it's very, very effective. Then turning the engine back on and sending it down into the zone, and then exiting away from the enemy. Very, very helpful. Yes?
Come up with like ideas like this?
No. The question was I asked to come up with ideas like that? We had a senior pilot in the squadron that had been to Patuxent River. Patuxent River does exactly this. They find out new things. And some of the senior captains, I was a lieutenant at the time, some of the senior captains were talking about it, said, no, you can't do it, you'll kill everybody. You'll crash the aircraft, you'll kill the people on the ground, you can't do it. Well, as I got confident with that maneuver, that particular pilot, he was a big, heavy-set fellow, and he was just about to rotate home. And I asked him to come out with me, and I said, listen, I want to demonstrate this maneuver because I'm working on it. He says, hey, you crazy, Devine? I said, well, how about if I set you down in the zone? Because there was a little zone not too far from Marble Mountain. How about if I set you down there and just show you? He says, well, okay. He says, I'm going home in a couple of days. I said, well, I won't land on you. So it was a thing just described in aviation beauty. Started in over the ocean, came in right over the sand, right over the trees, with stopping the engine and flaring and setting down. And, I felt like I'm glowing. And, and the big fella gets in the co-pilot seat and he says, Devine, he said, that's the most beautiful maneuver I've ever seen. But if you screw up, it's all on you. And all of the regulators will be on top of you and you'll be gone. But he says you could possibly save a lot of lives being able to do that. So I thought, I don't dare teach it to anybody except I had a buddy. And this buddy had just come into the squadron. He had been a test pilot at VMO, who was at VMO 1 coming off the East Coast. And took him up to altitude after a couple of test flights, showed him how to do it. And he could do it after the first few times. He had a mentor there to work with him, and he was going very, very nicely. Okay, so just put that in mind. Yes, go ahead, Henry. The question is, did NATOPS recommend this maneuver? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. This was well beyond anything that was accepted. But a situation came up, and let me just see if I can describe the situation. It is, we use the term ODARC 30. Many of you know what ODARC 30 is. It's well in advance of the sunrise. And we brief, and we're heading out. We've got 2 A4s on station. There's 2 gunships. It's a recon insertion. There's 12 reconers, 6 per aircraft, 2 Hueys, slicks that are carrying the troops, 2 gunships, myself and another fellow. And Piano Man is the reserve. He's the 5th aircraft in the air. And we're right next to the DMZ. We can see the DMZ sitting up here. This is the second landing zone. The first landing zone we go into was only a fake. We faked, we made a lot of noise, pulled out, went about 3 clicks to the east, and came in here. Now, I was the lead gunship, so it's me coming in full steam right along here, and my buddy, my wingman, he's coming along here. Okay, these are trees. This is a big tree area. And I'm coming in, and I glance down, and I see 50 stacks of guns and perhaps 200 uniformed NVA. And that's where they are. And the first slick helicopters coming in with 6 Recon Marines, and I'm yelling, don't land, nobody off, evacuate, whatever I could think of at the time. But it was a little bit too late because the first aircraft came in, pilot heard my warning, but these kids in the back are Marines. They're Recon Marines. These guys are pumped. 3 of them jumped into the elephant grass. Elephant grass. Oops, where'd you go? Elephant grass all in through here. So they're not totally visible from these guys. These guys all grabbed their guns. I did a figure 8. I'm coming back in hot, firing. with everything I got. My wingman's right behind me. He's ready to make his run. We're doing what we can to give him some suppression, but we got 3 guys all by themselves in the zone with, I don't know, battalion, company, I don't know what size it actually was. But the kids, the reconners that had jumped off, had a radio. And that made all the difference because I was able to talk to them, let them know what was going on. They had radio, they had a smoke. I got Piano Man, said, Piano Man, it's time for our maneuver. And sure enough, this kid came down midst our firing. We're firing back and forth here, figure eights, back and forth, clearing that area. Naturally, the NVA was moving back into the deeper woods. And, but the firing, I'd never heard firing quite as extensive as this. So Piano Man comes down, swings down, does our maneuver, lands on top of the smoke. The smoke's just coming up through the grass, lands on top of the smoke, firing still just all over the place. But he's out of there in under 6 seconds, and he's got the 3 Marines. It was incredible, but who am I going to tell about it? I'm not going to get him in trouble. I'm not going to get myself in trouble because we did this maneuver, but the maneuver was effective. No question about it. Okay, one more. All right. Those stories are part of what I set down. I wrote. I couldn't talk about Vietnam for 30 years, but somewhere in the 90s or the early 2000s, I started writing, and it just kind of regurgitated. It just came out, and I picked out a variety of missions that were still in my mind. A number of insights that I had. For instance, I called one "Miscreants in Our Midst." And who the miscreants were was the embedded reporters. They weren't embedded. They lived in Saigon. They'd come up, they'd do a mission, they'd write about it, send it back, and they knew what their editors wanted. I was not enamored with them, but writing just helped to get things moving in my system. And I'm going to send Henry from Vietnam. I'm going to send him a picture, a story that I wrote about Nguyen Cao Ky as premier. I had the occasion to fly him. Since he was a pilot, General Walt, who was his pilot at the time for a short period, General Walt wanted him to fly. The lovely gal Brittany from Vietnam that came and spoke to us some time ago. I sent the story to her and had a nice repartee with her. I have a poem, and I've got 2 more pictures to show you. I happen to like poetry. Ever since those days of trying to teach my fellow Marines songs, I don't remember words to poems, but this one sticks in my mind because my mother gave it to me at an early age, and it goes something like this. One ship sails east while another drives west with the self-same winds that blow. 'Tis the set of the sail and not the gale that tells us the way to go. Like the winds of the sea are the ways of fate as we travel along through life. 'Tis the set of our soul that determines the goal and not the calm or the strife. What the poem says is that character matters. And when I think of character, I think of this lad. As my oldest son joined the Marines, I never mentioned it. I wasn't even talking about Vietnam prior to that. The kid said, I'm in the PLCs. You did it, I'm doing it. I said, makes sense to me. So that was 1989, 1990, graduated from San Diego State. And then some 30 years later, hey, there he is again. He is a bird colonel. Just just knocks me out. Oh, he retired years ago. He flew for the DEA while I was in the reserves. The lad first saw combat duty in Somalia, and then 4 subsequent tours, Iraq and Afghanistan, Yemen. That's the formal part of what I was going to say. If there are questions, comments, I don't hear well, but we'll find some way to get your question asked. Did the Marine Corps ever accept this maneuver? To my knowledge, no. To my knowledge, no. However, I tried it at Lockheed and it worked really good. Rigid rotor could do it too. Hey, Jim. That sounded really good, right? Yeah.
Did they call your maneuver the Devine drop?
The Devine drop. I like it. I like it. Billy.
Talk about the difference between rigid rotor and regular rotor.
The rigid rotor, if you know your shoulder, your shoulder is fully articulated. It can move in 3 different dimensions. The rigid rotor moved in 1, and that's the one. We had a problem. And technically, I don't want to go into it unless someone is particularly interested, but there was a flaw in our design, and a young flight test engineer and myself went up in the smaller helicopter, telemetered. We got as much data as we could. I induced this thing, and to describe it, we called it 1/2 P hop. That is, that blade was going to hop 2 times going around the perimeter. And unfortunately, it was negative dynamic stability. And what negative dynamic stability means is that every rotation, the amplitude increases. And my very good friend lost his life in a Cheyenne, and the program went down the tubes within a few months. However, the bright side is Germans discovered how to do the rigid rotor. And my son, he got to fly the Volkow in the Drug Enforcement Agency. He was in the aviation group in the DEA. So he got to fly it, and it was the hottest aircraft going. That's a good question. I did not discuss it with anybody on my crew chief. My crew chief knew, and he was solid. He knew it could be done. The word got around that what I was doing, and a couple other pilots would do modified versions of it. But yeah, it did spread around a little bit. I missed it. Who? Oh, crew chief. Oftentimes, crew chief be in the co-pilot seat because I put him up there. I give him a little stick time. Really fine man. But to this day, every time I see a Pena in the Olympics or anywhere, I think, hey, that's got to be his kid. Yes, Henry.
Okay, what airspeed did you come and approach, and what airspeed you flare?
When I come in, I was going 140 knots with the larger blade. 140 knots, cut the engine, and so we're bleeding airspeed to maintain altitude. And so I didn't look at the airspeed gauge, but I would say we're doing about 90 knots, and probably 2.5 seconds with the rotors turned 90 degrees, and we'd be down in there. Yeah, John.
You're low on ammo, you're out of water, you've got wounded there.
and you hear that whop, whop, whop of the helicopter blade, I can't tell you what a rush that is, what a tremendous rush that is. And even today, when a helicopter flies over, I stop and look up because of brave guys like this to bring it into a hot LZ.
John was in Recon, and I've told him there are two groups that walk on water. The first is a corpsman. Corpsman group, I'm telling you, most incredible people on earth. But right next to them, Marine Recon. And up until Sunday, spending a day with General Flynn as he was making his presentation at the American Legion. There's another guy that walks on water. I just am enamored with what he's been able to get through. Yep. What was my VMO2? Yeah, VMO meant it's a carryover from Korea, Marine Observation Squadron. The reason out of flight training I asked to go to the observation squadron was that I knew they were going to get Hueys. It took a year behind schedule. They eventually got Hueys. The Hueys were going to have guns and rockets, and that intrigued me. Since Vietnam, our squadrons have been renamed, and they're called light attack HLAs, and that's far more pertinent. How are we doing? Yes, sir.
When you were serving our country in Vietnam, I was still in high school, and one of my teachers was a Navy aviator from World War II. And he had mentioned to us in class about a helicopter that did something that no other helicopter had ever done before. And there's no use for doing it, but it did it. It was a helicopter that could actually fly upside down and turn around. Is that rigid rotor? Okay, that was he said that was the first helicopter that ever can do something like that.
That happened in 1965, and it was a fellow test pilot at Lockheed. The fellow's name was Sammy Mason, and Sammy Mason was an old barnstorming pilot, and he had more time upside down in barnstorming activities than I had flying straight and level. But Sammy Mason in 1965 took our helicopter and in the Paris Air Show did a complete loop. And it was an astounding thing at that time because no helicopter with the articulation could possibly do that. However, it became the thing. And in reserve squadrons, particularly when we got the Cobra, we found that the Cobra could do a loop as well. That's just the thing that aviators do. Our aircraft, our squadron had both slicks and guns. So a portion of the aircraft were slicks, and those would get medevac, they would get VIP. We got to fly Bob Hope around because we had the newest aircraft. I got to meet Martha Ray. I mean, who remembers Martha Ray? Only those of us with white hair recall Martha Ray. She's a lovely, lovely person. A rainy day, I got to spend about 3 or 4 hours chatting with her, and oh gosh, she's such fun. But VIP supply, dropping troops in, were limited in capacity. The H-34 could carry more troops. When the H-46 came in, like in spring of '66, they were the go-to for troop insertions and all. But pretty exciting time. Really enjoyed my years of flying, but had the common sense after a few close calls in private aircraft to realize when it's over, it's over. Let it go. Walk away from it. And this talk is over.